new or visiting with us, we've been going through summer Sunday school stories. And if you think of summer Sunday school, of classic Sunday school stories, what's one of the classics, right? David and Goliath, right? Like that's a huge one. That's one. Who has never heard David and Goliath? I should probably ask. Right? Like almost even if you've never spent a day in your life in church, you've probably heard the David and Goliath story. It's become just a part of culture. Now, before we start, we're going to just talk about the controversy of the David and Goliath story. Did anybody know there was controversy in the story? Besides the murder of another human being? No, right? So, a couple people, those who went to Bible college. So in 1 Samuel, it talks about David killing Goliath, but in 2 Samuel, it talks about a man named Al. There's a list of 4 people, 4 giants who were killed, and the 4 people who killed them. And the third one, it says Elhanan kills Goliath, of Gath, and describes him in the same way. And you go, well, what in the world? I thought David killed him. And then Chronicles, and the book of Chronicles is a retelling of kind of the history of David, but they really just put all the good stuff in, they take all the bad stuff out. But in Chronicles, it says, no, Elhanan didn't kill Goliath, he killed Goliath's brother. And so people go, now what do you do with it? Now, one of the reasons we bring this up is not to dissuade you from reading the Bible. Someone in your life is going to go, aha, I got you. Who really killed Goliath? And 2 things. One, some people go, well, no, there was a scribal error, and this guy wrote this. And other people say, well, maybe they're taking the story of this Elhanan guy and they're putting David in to make a point. In the end, people get to argue about it. Go online and just write who killed Goliath, and all these things will come up, and all sorts of different viewpoints, and they don't really agree in the end. But what we're going to discover, and that's not really the point either way, because as we read this story in 1 Samuel, they are retelling the story, and they're retelling it in a purposeful way, and we're going to see, and it comes through the details. They're not just telling the story, here's exactly what happened. They're making a bigger point out of what happened, and you're going to see that here. And so they're definitely rewriting it, because, again, in 1 Samuel 16, because you've been reading along, David's already met Saul. He's become his little harpist, and then he becomes his armor bearer, right? So clearly Saul knows David. They know each other. But then in chapter 17, Saul knows David. They know each other. But then in chapter 17, they're clearly rewriting because they go back, and all of a sudden Saul doesn't know who David is anymore. He's like, who is this guy who's doing this? They're like, that's the son of Jesse. And so they're making a point. We're going to find out what the point is, and it comes in all of the details that we're about to read. And so turn to chapter 17 with me, 1 Samuel. I got a large print Bible, and it's so much easier. It worried me. I didn't mean to. I just picked it up. I was reading it. I was like, this is so much better. And I was like, oh, those words are so much bigger. Verse 32. Well, all right. There's some stuff before, too. You guys know the story, right? You got the Philistines on one side, you got the Israelites on their side, and Goliath is this big dude, and he keeps coming out every day, and he challenges them, and he defies God, right? He defies the God of Yahweh, the God of Israel, and he defies them all the time. And so he's a shepherd, he's the youngest, and he's just going to take some food, and he hears this, and then he's really mad because nobody seems to be going out to face this guy who's insulting Yahweh, right? So he decides he's going to do it. And the brothers think he's being conceited and all this stuff, and then he goes and they try and put on some of his armor, Saul's armor, and he's like, nah, that doesn't work for me either. And so yeah, it's a whole big thing. So we'll start at a little bit beginning. We're not going to read the whole thing together. But the Philistines, right? They're mustered their army for battle. They're camped between Soka and Judah and Azekah at Ephes Damim. And right off the bat, some of these things are actually important for you. And this is why. Here. And so some of these details. So the place called Soka, it means thorn bush, right? The idea is it's called thorn bush. The Azekah means the broken fields, the harrowed fields, the tilled fields. So they're camped between this place. One is the thorn bush and the tilled fields. Now, as soon as you hear thorn bush and tilled fields, where do you go to? What does that bring to mind? Anybody? What do you think of? Thorns? Work in the field. Where does it take you? Anybody take you to Genesis? When they get kicked out of Eden, what does God say? He goes, now you're going to have to what? You have to till the fields, but as you're doing it, you're going to struggle with what? Thorns and weeds, right? So he's camped between this place, this tilled field, the broken fields, the harrowed fields, and the bushes, literally the bushes. And where is Israel? And so they're there. Saul countered, and he gathered The valley of Elah. Now, Elah is this terebinth tree. It's the place of terebinth trees or nice trees. And so you have Israel is in a valley full of nice trees, and you have the enemies over in this place of the tilled fields and the thorn bushes. And this is what you sort of have this picture of now. You have this picture of the beautiful place with the trees, paradise, and then this other place with the thorn bushes and the tilled fields. And you get this sense already, even from the very beginning of the story, of what the picture that they're trying to point here, that they're trying to paint, I should say. And so, obviously, the Philistines, they're exile, and of course, Israel is kind of paradise, and they're camped in the nice place. So this is what you get so far. This is where we are. And then in between is you have this valley, and this battle is going to take place in between these two places. Right? In between these two places, and obviously, if someone wins, this is going to decide which side wins. So Goliath, they're facing each other opposite hills, and Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, comes out of Philistine. And the ranks, he faces Israel. He's a giant of a man, measuring over 9 feet tall. Now, some say 9 feet, right? The Masoretic text said he was not over 9 feet. Septuagint puts him at 7'9". Point is, he's huge, right? Like 7'9" is nothing to laugh at either. He's a big dude. He's a very big dude. He wore a bronze helmet, coat of mail, weighs 125 pounds. Bronze leggings, the javelin on his back, the shaft of his spear was heavy as thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds, and an arm bearer walked ahead of him carrying a huge field. And here's what he does every day, right? He shouts across to the Israelites, "Do you need a whole army to settle this? Choose someone to fight for you, and I will represent the Philistines. We'll settle this dispute in single combat. If your man is able to kill me, we will be your slaves. If I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel. Send me a man who will fight with me." And when Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. So that's the beginning of the story. He set the scene. David's about to come with his cheese and his bread and give it to his brothers. But already they set this up as a battle between basically what is Eden and what is exile, between those who are good, which is Israel, and those who are the enemies, those who represent exile, those who would represent everything that is not God. And so, of course, Goliath comes out and talks this way. So this is kind of the picture we already have. Right? And the word champion, the Philistine champion. Champion means it translates as the man between, the man of the in-between, right? Because the battle is fought in between. And whoever is left standing at the end of this, that's who wins. Will it be Eden? Will it be exile? Now here's the thing about Goliath, and Goliath is his name. The root letters of Goliath is the same as the word exile. So literally Goliath is the man of the exile. He is the one who represents what is not God. And he's coming out. He's defying Yahweh. And as they describe him, how big he is, how thick everything, it's all these different things. Right? They're making them. If you saw a guy that big, what would you say? What would you call him in our basketball player? Right? But if you see a guy like, what's that one big Swedish guy, like the Mountain, the guy they call the Mountain, right? You say that guy's a monster, literally. A monster. He's just huge. He's just massive. And not even just height, like just a massive, massive dude. You ever see a guy like that? You're playing sports, and I remember, oh man, rugby against Waterloo, Oxford. We thought we were tough stuff. They got off the buses and they weren't wearing shirts, and the girls on our team were like, "Oh, those look like men. You look like boys." And while we were mad inside, we're like, "Yeah, these guys are huge." They were like, all these farm boys were like, and we lost 107-6 or something. Yeah, it was pretty bad. Although they did congratulate us for the first team that year to score against them. Yeah. So they were huge, right? And you're like, these guys are monsters, and they're just getting off the bus like, what is happening here? This is crazy, right? I did not know who these people were. And so as they're describing him, right, as they're describing his height, as describing how big, they're also describing all of his helmet, bronze helmet, all these things, the bronze leggings, everything that he has. Now here's the thing, the words that he's using, neshut, it's the same root letters as snake, right? It's the same root letters. So as he says bronze, some say copper, some say bronze. It's the same word that they use when Moses makes a bronze, when he makes a bronze snake. And the thing, it's the same root word again. And then when it talks about his armor, right? It says the bronze leg he slung. It actually depends on your version, depends which one you're reading. But it says it's like his armor is like scale. It talks about scale. So they make reference in the words that they use and they choose in writing this story to bring up images of snakes. They talk about the scales. They talk about how big everything is. And the same word, neshut, for the leggings, for the swords. Everything that he's wearing has this reference to these snakes. And what are they trying to say? What are they trying to say about Goliath? They're trying to say this guy is a monster, not just because he's big, but the way to describe him, he's like a snake. He's like a dragon. He is, in their imagery, right? In the imagery of all through the Old Testament, It's an image of what? It's of, again, chaos monster. Because in the garden you have the snake, he's a chaos monster. In Revelation you have the dragon, he's a chaos monster. And this is how they describe Goliath. He's got the scaly thing. He's got all of the things that reference the snake. He's a massive, massive person. And so what they have is someone who represents chaos, who represents evil, standing across on the exile side of the valley. And he's defying God. He's defying God. And nobody knows what to do. Everybody is scared. But this creature of destruction, this monster, he's bent on defaming and destroying this nation of God. And again, you go back to the creation story. God separates the chaos waters and he creates this paradise. And the fear always is that the chaos will come back in. And so as they're writing the story, there is this sense of this when they see this story with Goliath. And as they're rewriting this story, as they're telling again, they take what actually happened, but they want to give you a bigger picture. This isn't just one battle. This is massive. This isn't just, another little skirmish. This is like the fate of who Israel is. And this one who defies and is bent on destroying God's people. And so David, again, he hears this, and the next bits is all about, he's mad, he's talking. Finally, he gets his sling. He goes over, says, I'm going to fight these people. But here's the thing that's interesting, right? He says, I'm going to fight the Philistines. Saul says, don't be ridiculous. There's no way. You're only a boy, right? He's been in the army since he was a child. David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep, he says. And when a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club. I take the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do this to this pagan Philistine too. For he has defied the armies of the living God. And the Lord who saved me from the claws of the lion and the bear will save me from the Philistines. What did he just say? They've just described Goliath like a monster, like this chaos, like a beast. And what does David say? He says, listen, I've fought monsters before. I've done this before. I fought the bear. I fought the lion. I can fight this guy too. God was with me then, and God he'll be with me again, right? And oh, by the way, sorry, forgot all about my pictures. There you see, right? And so the way they describe him kind of as this monster, he says, I can do this, right? He says, I can do this. And so he does. He goes, he gets his sling, he gets his stones, he walks out there. Goliath, of course, mocks him. And then before the whole thing begins, he's just about starting, Goliath starts to charge. What does David do? He takes his rock, takes the sling. And again, you think of a kid with a sling. No, these guys are like sharpshooters, by the way, just in case. As a kid, you're like, that's amazing. You hit them. No, these guys are really, really good. There's an entire tribe of people in their army. They're all slingers. And they're fantastic. Right? So again, he's been doing this a long time. This is not something he just whipped out of his pocket. He bought at, Canadian Tire. This is a legit thing. So he knows what he's doing, right? Like, he's trained for this, and that's why he's confident. He says, listen, God has been with me. I've beaten monsters before. I know I can. He's not just going out there like, I've never done this before, trying to learn how to aim, right? Like, he's done this before. And he knows he has the ability, and he knows that God is with him. I've beaten monsters before. I can beat this guy too. And so it is interesting. So he goes out, and it says he hit the stone. The stone hits him right between the eyes. And what does it say? I don't know what your version says, actually. We may all have different versions. So he does. He goes, you come up these, verse 48. So Goliath moved closer to attack. David quickly runs out to meet him, reaches through the bag, he takes up a stone, he hurls it from his sling, and he hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face downward to the ground. So it says it sunk, right? Who in the biblical story sinks? Anybody? Any enemies of Israel ever sink? Right? There's this weird sense, like, why would he use that word? Why would he say he collapsed to the ground? Why would he say he fell to the ground? He says he sunk to the ground. In the same way the Egyptians sunk. And here's what's really interesting. When it says he fell, again, depending on your version, it says he fell face downward into the dust or into the ground. Literally, his mouth is open and he's eating the dust. Now, they have them backwards, right? Because painters didn't apparently read the Bible. But the picture is that he fell face forward into the dust. Now, what's he doing? If you fall open, your mouth is open, what do? You're eating dust. What do we say to people? Eat my dust, right? Right? But when you hear about eating dust, where does that take you to? What rings in your mind? Genesis, right? When God is talking, he says, listen, the serpent is here. He goes, and it's going to strike your heel. He goes, but you're going to crush its head. Part of that curse upon the snake is, he says, you're going to crawl along on your belly, and you're going to what? You're going to eat the dust. You're going to eat the dust. And so when he sinks him, much like the Egyptians, and when he falls and he hits the ground and he's literally eating dust. So this guy this monster with the scales and all of the same root words as snake. So when he destroys the snake and he eats the dust, as Israel's telling the story, they know Genesis. Right? They know the story of Genesis. They know this story. And so they're writing this in this same way. Cursed are you to eat the dust of the ground. And this is how they're picturing this. He is just another one of these chaos monsters. He's another one of these monsters coming to bring chaos back into God's world. And David steps up. And David takes literally. And so what happens next? And again, this is the big part. Right? And so he falls down. And he hits the ground. So David triumphs. He ran over. He pulls Goliath's sword. And he cuts off his head. And then what does he do? Now, Philistines, they all run away. But what does David do with the head? Right? He took Goliath's head to Jerusalem. Right? And then Saul watched him go to fight. He goes, well, who's this guy? I don't know. Let's find out. And then he brings the head with him. And it's all about the head. The head gets mentioned like 3 or 4 times. Why? Because what is in Genesis? It says, first he'll eat dust, be cursed to, but then you will what? You will strike his head. This chaos monster, you will strike the snake, you will strike his head. And it keeps talking about the head, and he walks around with it. I don't know if it's the picture you saw in the email, right? It's kind of gross. He's holding it up, and there's the entrails. When it's small, it's not always easy to see. Once you send it, you're like, oh, it's kind of gross. So I apologize to anybody. But what is this picture? And the amazing thing, what it ends with, it says, who is this guy? He goes, oh, his name, his father, he's from Jesse. He goes, we live in Bethlehem. So here you have this amazing picture. And again, if you're Israel, right, you know this story of Genesis. You have this picture. And the way that they see David, what is this promise? Someone is going to come who is going to what? He's going to save you. And this person is going to step up and he's going to save all of you from what? From evil. And he's, maybe this snake, maybe this serpent will strike your heel, but you will crush his head. And so when they're telling the story of David, how do they see David? To them, David is the Messiah. David is the one that they're waiting for. In their mind, they don't know about Jesus yet. They don't know Jesus is coming. They don't know any of that. But it's literally, it's a son of Bethlehem. Right? There's all sorts of different, but Marduk especially, like he's writing in that same way that this is who our God is. He's the one who comes, and it actually says in the at the end of chapter 22, it says that he breathes again and he splits the waters once again. Just like in Genesis, when the chaos waters are there, when it looks like evil is about to win, God comes down like one of these storm gods. What does he do? He defeats evil. And through his breath, he once again separates the chaos water. And he sets everything right. This is how David sees himself. This is how Israel sees him. Because again, Jesus isn't there yet. Again, to them, the Messiah to them is one who's going to free them politically. He's going to free them with an army. And so as they write this story, as they retell this story, they put all these details in there so that they say, this David is the one. And here's what's amazing. Right? The son of Bethlehem is the one that they think has delivered us. But they don't know about Jesus yet. Jesus, and here's the amazing thing about Jesus. What does Jesus do? Jesus comes along. Where is he from? He's from Bethlehem. So like, these people weren't far off. They go, yeah, son of Bethlehem is the chosen one. He is the one who is going to stand before all of us, and he's going to, what he does on the battlefield is going to save all of us. And they were so close, they just thought it was David. But what's amazing is that as God uses this, and as they tell this story, and as they think he's the chosen one, God's like, no, just keep waiting and see what I'm going to do. Keep waiting to see what I'm going to do. Because my plan is still coming. And then you have Jesus as he's being betrayed, and Judas has just come, he's giving him a kiss. And what does he say in Luke? He says, this now belongs to the darkness. Right? Like, this is the hour of darkness. Darkness has won at this point. This is what he says. The chaos, the evil goes, this hour belongs to you. Because he knows what's going to happen. But what's amazing is that Jesus, another son of Bethlehem, what does he do? He goes and on his own, he stands before this evil. He stands before the chaos. And what does he do? He doesn't just, slay a giant. He destroys evil itself. He destroys sin and the effect of sin, which is death. And through this moment where he becomes a much greater David than David could have ever imagined he was. No matter how great they thought David was, no matter how amazing Israel thought David was, David couldn't even begin to touch what Jesus came to do. Right? Not just to defeat one army at one time for a few years until he was dead and his son came along, and they kept coming back and they kept going and going and going and back and forth and back and forth, and you can only fight so long as a king. But when Jesus comes, he does it once and he does it for all time. It's not like Jesus goes to, gets old and passes away and then another Messiah has to come along, just like the kings of old. No, he comes and he does this. This is the plan of God. It's not to use a political king, bring peace through war and battle and death. But this other son of Bethlehem, he comes, and through his own death, he brings peace. And through his own death, right? This is what he did. This is the plan. And so as much as they picture Goliath as the embodiment of this evil, as much as they think David is the chosen one standing before the people of Israel, keeping at bay, this land of exile, this land of chaos, the evil, we know, thankfully, we get to live on this side of Jesus. That what God's actual plan was, is to come himself, to come as Christ, and to give his life for us. To do away with evil once and for all. So we don't cheer the story of Goliath, and we got to cheer, the next week and the next week and the next battle and the next battle. We don't have to live in that kind of, today we live to fight another day. Because imagine the cheering when David beat Goliath, right? Like, I imagine there was a lot of relief behind him, right? Day after day after day after. It was again 40 days, right? 40 days of listening to the giant, 40 days of listening to defy Yahweh. And then all of a sudden just the relief, the joy, the overwhelming thanks that David did what he did. So as we read this story, we can rejoice and be like, that's amazing for them. But then we look to Jesus and we go, man, what kind of, and again, we weren't there. But we get to think through that story because what Jesus did was so much greater than what David did. So how do we respond to the story of Christ, right? It's weird to think like we sit and cheer because it's weird to think about. But, but as we think of that story, as we think of what Jesus did, so much greater than what David did and what Israel did. And so we do rejoice. When we think of the story of Goliath, David and Goliath, we think of Jesus and all of evil and all of sin and what he did, and we do rejoice. That's part of the life of the Christian. We rejoice in the truth of what Jesus did for us on the cross and in the resurrection, as he destroyed the snake. So we rejoice and we say thank you. I bet you a lot of people, at least 10 or 20, or all of them, thanked David. Anybody? I have a feeling he probably, like in the movies, right? At the end, they put you on their shoulders, and right? Rudy? Anybody? Never actually seen Rudy. Sorry. Lord of the Rings, maybe at the end. There's got to be some movie in your life you have seen. They hoist you up and everybody cheers and they're just, it's amazing. This is the best part of the movie. Well, this is us every single day, that we get to rejoice because of what Jesus did. And every single day, I know we don't do it physically, but in our hearts and with our lives, what do? We hoist up Jesus onto our shoulders and we say, it's because of what you did. It's because you have won this for us. There was nothing that we could do, but you did it for us. You stood in front of us. You stood between us, between the Eden and the exile. And you are the champion. You are the man of the in-between, the one who is left standing. And there is nobody left standing but Jesus. This is the picture we have of Jesus. And again, they didn't recognize it, but as they write this story, they think they're writing about David, the son of Bethlehem. And it's amazing that God's like, you're still close. Just wait a few more years. And one of your descendants, actually, one of your descendants will be the true champion. And so we rejoice and we say thanks. What's also interesting is that when David goes to Saul, Saul's like, all right, here's how you fight. Put on all the armor, you go out there. And David's like, this is totally useless, right? Totally useless. Because this is not who I am. He's not a fighter. What is he? He goes, I'm a shepherd. This is how I work out in the fields. This is what I've been doing for 20 years, however old he is. Right? He goes, I have skills, I have abilities that God can use. This sword, this armor, I can't do that stuff. That's not me. But he trusts God and he says, God, you've birthed me, you've raised me, you've been with me. Everything about my life has led me to this point, every experience that I have. And I'm going to trust you with that I can do this because of who I am and because of what you can do through what I have. Now, the good thing for us is we do not have to fight any battles, right? Jesus has done that for us. We don't have to. But what do we do every day? Because the world is not perfect, right? Anybody? Not yet. We're not quite there. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of darkness. So as we rejoice in what Christ did, what do we do next? We read this story. We recognize Jesus in this story. And we know the Jesus story. We know the death and the resurrection. We know what that means for us. So as we rejoice, we also say, Lord, Everything that has brought me up until this point, every experience that I have, every natural gift, every spiritual gift, everything that I am, I want you to use. I want you to take all my experience. I want you to take who I am. Everything that makes me, I want you to take it. And what do? We're not fighting battles at the spiritual level. Like we're not trying to destroy evil. Jesus has done that. But we get to live every day doing what? We get to push back. There may not be an actual giant standing in front of us. And don't kill them if you do meet one. Call the police. Don't take it in your own hands. But what do? We live every day recognizing that they're still evil, recognizing that chaos enters into our world, all of them, that there's brokenness and darkness. And so we say to Lord, take everything that makes me, take everything that you've given to me, take everything that you've created me to be, and I want this to be yours. Just like David says, that's not who I am, that's not what I am. Lord, just use me. Because a lot of people, I think they go, God can't use me. God uses everybody. Right? Little shepherd boy and his brothers are like, you're conceited, you just want to see the battle. Turns out he's the hero, right? That's got to be annoying when you're the older brothers. But he has given us all of these things. What we get to do is we get to turn around. I love this. Let us expect that God is going to use us. Right? Let us have the courage to go forward, looking to God to do great things. Everybody told Dave, you can't do this. You're doing it wrong. You need to do it this way. He goes, listen, just trust me. I know who I am, and I know how God can use me. And I'm going to trust that God is going to. And he's just like, God's going to do this. I fought monsters before I can do it again. And so as we read this story, as we understand this story, again, we rejoice because we see Jesus in it, the foreshadowing of Jesus. But also, what do we do within our own lives? Well, go out into this world. You will face darkness. You will face evil. You will face chaos in this world. Just trust that God has given you gifts. God has given you. God has walked with you all of these years. And we get to trust that. Take who you are. Let God use who you are. Don't try and be somebody else. Don't try and do things. Trust that God has you as who you are, and let him use you. Let him use you here in our world. Again, we don't win the overall battle, but we get our own little battles in life. We get to help those around us who are struggling, those who are hurting. We got to go into the world and see where this is. Sometimes the evil is really evident in front of us. Sometimes it's hard to do things about it, especially when it's around the world. You go, what am I going to do? That's overwhelming evil. But we can pray. We can trust God with that, right? There's some things that are way out of our control, and we just pray those ones. We say, Lord, this is totally you, right? There might be people better suited than me. That is not the gift I have. It is way beyond me. But use me here in this place where you put me. Use me in the lives of my children, my family, and my neighbors, and my coworkers. In all of these ways, we're going to trust. And so as we read this story, we rejoice that we see Jesus, but we also trust that God can use us. Because sometimes you read these stories, you go, man, I want to be that. I had a dream of being Billy Graham when I grew up. Anybody have that? Right? I thought, I'm going to be the next Billy Graham. Then I grew older and said, that sounds terrible. Like I was always away from home. That looked like not a good gig. And so I gave that up at least 2 years ago. COVID killed. No, it's been a long time. But I kind of grew up with that when I was younger. I thought maybe I'll be the next Billy Graham. I don't want to be Billy Graham. God doesn't need me to be Billy Graham. Billy Graham was Billy Graham. Right? God needs me to be me. God needs to use me right where he puts me, right? Where he puts me, and he needs to, and we just need to trust that. Say, Lord, sometimes I look up to these people, I want to be like David, I want to, fight actual monsters. And God is using you exactly where in the lives of people that you know and that you love, and they need someone to walk up next to them and stand between them and what is happening between them. Someone to be the champion, that man of the in-between. Someone between the love of God, the promise, and the hope of God, which maybe they do not know, and the darkness that they are facing. And that gets to be us. That gets to be us. So as we read this story, we rejoice because we know that this is the story of Jesus, but also it encourages us to continue to go out and what? To continue to be the people of God that he has called us to be. And so as you take that story to heart, I encourage you to think about those things. Always rejoice in what Jesus did for us, but also to be encouraged and emboldened to trust that God is using you in this world, to do on this smaller scale what he's called us to do. Push back evil. Fight the monsters and the evil in this world. This is part of who we are. And this is part of what we celebrate at communion every week. Right? What do? We take the bread and the cup. We say, Lord, you did this for us. This is amazing. We could not do it on our own. There's nothing we could do. But you stood between us and evil. You stood between us and death, and you offered us life, and we accept that life. And what we're doing when we take it, we're rejoicing, but we're also accepting that and say, yes, I believe your victory was a total victory and a true victory, and I want to live in that. And this is what we do at communion. But also when we take communion, what else are we saying? We say, Lord, Fill me this week as I go out into this world. As I go into this world, help me stand in between someone who needs, someone who is struggling, someone who is maybe has no hope. Go with me this week. Embolden me, give me that courage that you have placed me and I'm exactly where you need me to be. And we're going to trust God this week that He's going to use us in this week, in this life, and the very day we take our last breath, that God will use us for His purposes here.